So, to begin, what exactly was the Mexican Revolution? To be bluntly put, it was an era of armed conflict and violence in Mexico in an attempt to overthrow the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz. Eventually, the United States would intervene and support the forces against Huerta's forces, and this would lead to many deaths on both the Mexican and American side. In this video, we will discuss how the Mexican Revolution led to El Paso being a city filled with hate and anti-Mexican sentiment that would eventually lead to the events that I will describe in this video. Racism, eugenics, and segregation in El Paso during the Mexican Revolution. This first picture by Walter H. Horn, titled The Mexican Section, showed how Mexicans were forced to live in subpar housing compared to the white people in El Paso who had proper housing and proper plumbing. This shows how racism affected the daily livelihoods of people, where they were forced to segregate in other places. This second picture by Horn shows Mexican children, again, living in subpar conditions, while the other white people in El Paso lived in excellent housing and proper housing. This again shows the racism affected even children. This third installment by Horn shows us Mexican soldiers living in subpar conditions as well. This shows how racism affected even the soldiers who fought for Mexico. This picture shows a photo of Juarez being influenced by American culture. We see how the Americans did not like Mexican culture to the point that they wanted to turn Mexicans into Americans. These images illustrate a Mexican soldier's experiences while fighting for Mexico. It describes poor living and working conditions and shows how the racism impacted the Mexican soldiers, while white soldiers did not have to go through these adverse conditions. This photo shows a dead Mexican soldier being carried by his fellow soldiers. This shows how the racism prevented the Mexicans from honoring their dead in a respectful way, and instead were forced to carry them in body bags across the field. Here, this El Paso Times writer writes about eugenics in El Paso and what their intention is to do through this, which is to create a superior race, specifically a superior white race. It mentions how they want to create human thoroughbreds by breeding out imperfections in humans. In this article by the El Paso Herald, it shows how even the women were for eugenics. Everybody in this time period basically hated Mexicans and wanted to rule them out of the gene pool and create their superior race. In this article, it discusses why scientists wanted eugenics and blatantly saying they wanted babies with white features, and even going as far as saying that a specific nose type hails from a royal family. This shows how white people place themselves above others and even considered them superior in terms of eugenics and facial features. This comic illustrated by the El Paso Herald shows the Osalt, which was a prominent figure back in the day in the newspaper, discussing eugenics. This shows how even popular figures were influencing the people to be for eugenics and therefore causing more racism against Mexicans. This book reads several first-hand accounts of Mexicans living in America during the Revolution. It recounts from witnessing crime running rampant on the streets to microaggressions. In this photo titled Mexican Refugees, we see how Mexicans were fleeing to the United States, and we see how they were in substandard clothing and in substandard conditions. This was because the Americans forced them to be in this. This letter documents an activist writing to schools in an attempt to end segregation between Latino children and white children. This shows how the segregation reached schools and affected the quality of education Mexican children received, as they were sent to subpar schools. Throughout this book by David Romo, he writes second-hand accounts of Mexicans living in America during this era, and them experiencing racism, such as the Prohibition era, where people were banned from going to Juarez under the pretense of the Prohibition, but really it was just because the Ku Klux Klan did not want race mixing. This book chronicles the journey of Dr. Lawrence and in his journey in ending racial segregation in the Texas borderland. He fought hard to end both black and Mexican segregation, and it even took an outsider to help with the racism that was rampant in these borderlands. In this book by Patricia Worthington, it shows a series of images that parallel the ones that I've shown in this video. It also shows images specific to that era and subtle signs of racism, such as whites-only signs, etc. This photo shows American and Mexican soldiers fighting together. In this photograph titled Battery A on the Border, it shows the border as being run down and segregated. We see Mexicans on one side and Americans on the other. This photo shows the same story. We see Mexicans on one side and Americans on the other, segregated by a river. This newspaper article by the El Paso Morning Times shows how the media was influenced by racism and instead only showed crimes committed by Mexicans as the front page. This would lead to more people villainizing the bandits and considering them criminals and subhuman. 3. So, in conclusion, I chose this topic not only because it was an important time during the revolution, it is still an important and relevant topic today, especially with a city that still has such a strong Latino population. From our most recent president to the tragedy that happened at Walmart, Latinos have faced and continue to face many adversities. I believe in order to not repeat the past, we have to learn about it, so we cannot allow this racism to keep existing. In the words of George Santayana, those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it.